My guess is when it comes to reading the book of Daniel, you're pretty familiar with chapters 1 to 6, and then probably you're less familiar with 7 to 12. The reason being that 7 to 12 is full of a bunch of confusing visions and things that seem like they're very crazy.
So Daniel is having these weird visions, and they're definitely odd and they're hard to keep up with because there's so many strange and odd things going on. It's very trippy in many different ways. And when I was reading over my chapter for today's reading, chapter 8, there's like goats and rams fighting each other in the water. And then actually, Gabriel, an angel, is called out by name that comes to say, hey, like, you actually, there is meaning to this. Daniel falls to his face in the dirt and falls asleep for a while. Gabriel snaps him back to reality and says, hey, listen, like, things are going to happen, things are going to come. This is like a hard thing to wrap your head around, but like, remember this and it will have meaning in the future.
There is a lot of things that, I mean, the visions are definitely bizarre. There is these four beasts, that's in Daniel 7. There are these fighting goats and rams, that's in Daniel 8. There are these like spans of weeks, that's in Daniel 9. There's just like a ton of symbolic kind of stuff. And there is literally hundreds, if not thousands of years of study done on these, trying to figure out what they mean. This is a good place for me to plug that we need to understand Scripture in the context of Scripture. And so you can't really dive deep into Daniel 7 to 9, I don't think, without keeping in mind the context of the early stories in Daniel. If you remember, Nebuchadnezzar initially, like, we're kind of introduced to Daniel as an interpreter of dreams,
Right.
because Nebuchadnezzar has this crazy dream about this like giant that's made of different kinds of materials and then a stone that wrecks those materials. And it seems like kind of a thread throughout Daniel is the rise and fall of nations. And so I want to be clear, there's a lot of different interpretations. There's a lot of people that have a lot of different opinions. If you want to do a deep dive into those things, you can look that up. I'm sure you can Google that. You can search it on the Logos. There's a lot of material out there, but it seems like the four beasts in Daniel 7 are actually four empires. And we've gone over these empires before. Babylon is going to be destroyed by the Medes and Persians. That's already kind of happened. The Medes and Persians are going to be destroyed by the Greeks. What's interesting about the Greeks is that the Greek Empire was kind of split up amongst four rulers, and there was one ruler among those four rulers that was much more powerful than the other three. And then Rome ends up upsetting all of that and destroying all of that. And that seems to be what's going on in Daniel 7. What's really interesting is in Daniel 7, verse 13, I saw in the night visions, and behold, there was clouds of heaven, and there came one like a son of man. So this is somebody coming from heaven that appears to be also a man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, that is God, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. So if you follow like this trend of nations, the thing that upsets the Roman Empire is actually this Son of Man that is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and all nations are submitting to him. It's got to be Jesus. It's got to be Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus, actually, one of his favorite monikers for himself is the Son of Man. And so it's, I think, very interesting in these visions that it's during, maybe, I think, yes, during the Roman Empire, that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords shows up and causes all nations to submit to himself. So that is Daniel 7. That is interpreted for him in Daniel 7. Daniel 8 talks about these rams and goats.
That's what I was talking about earlier. Something that I was actually kind of curious about while you were talking about the Son of Man is that you said that eventually that kind of was like worrisome to people, right? Like the idea of Son of Man coming. to like
Oh,
rule over.
yeah, probably.
So is that like kind of like a lead in for Herod?
No, I think the Son of Man is Jesus.
Obviously. But I'm saying like is the fear of that same Son of Man, like you were talking about, like Herod is like fearful of this coming.
Oh, yeah,
What?
maybe he's
Oh,
aware of that. Maybe he's. I mean, certainly Herod is afraid of a coming ruler that will be more powerful than himself.
right,
That's why he kills off all the babies
right,
that
and
are
that's
like
why I'm wondering,
two
like,
years
is
and
this
younger.
like a like something that he would have been aware of, like the words of Daniel,
I
the
think he.
prophecy of Daniel?
I think he probably would have been. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that caught my attention when you were talking about that.
Yeah.
But then yeah. Anyway, so we get into chapter 8 when we're talking about this crazy weird vision, but it's the same idea again as what you were saying earlier. There's like this smaller, less significant animal, this little goat that's coming up that is super strong that overtakes this really powerful ram, but there's like nothing that anybody can do about it because he overcomes it. He's stronger than the ram, and actually it said that the goat had two horns, one of which was broken,
Mm-hmm.
and the other, well, I guess, withstood it. I don't remember quite what the other one was, but basically that the kind of like rising and falling, like you were talking about, is what I thought of.
Yeah, people try to actually figure out who those horns represent and
Yeah.
which rulers they are. It seems like Alexander the Great could be one of them. It seems like this guy that's called Epiphanes could be one of them.
Yeah.
I think, sometimes you can go too deep down the rabbit hole with these visions because ultimately all of these visions are united by the fact that God's rule over these nations is like universally guaranteed. So there's like these big bad dudes that show up on the playground, and at the end of the story, God's always like, "Yeah, I'm in charge. Stop it." I really like Daniel 9. Daniel 9 shows you how Daniel actually prays. If you want to feel like you're getting some direction in how Daniel prayed, you can read Daniel 9 and just see exactly what that looks like. Like a big part of the Daniel in the Lion's Den story is that he was in the upper room praying 3 times a day. I think these are the things that he was praying for. And what's interesting is that Daniel's like pretty well known as a universal good guy. And most of his prayer is asking for forgiveness of his sins and asking for forgiveness for the sins of his people. Also, it shows us that Daniel knows the book of Jeremiah, and he's like literally counting up the days trying to figure out when they're going to be able to go home. And it's revealed here in Daniel 9 that they're going to be able to go home pretty soon. So Daniel 9 is really interesting.
Well, our Bible talks a little bit about how Jeremiah was prophesying that God would restore his people after 70 years in Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
So Daniel knows this, and he is asking in faith that God would lead them to this restoration.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of cool. Cool tie-in. I like how it kind of all ropes together across the board.
So then in the latter part of Daniel 9, you get into this 70 weeks and kind of all these different time periods.
I was going to say, there's a lot of different allotments of strange amounts of time.
Yeah, and it's like not necessarily like nailed down. There's a lot of different views on this. There's different views that rise to the top, different views that different people support more than others. If you want to dig into that, you can dig into that. What's interesting is that there seems to be this period of the people doing what they're supposed to do, followed by this period of people not doing what they're supposed to do, followed by this pretty strong antagonist figure, and followed by some kind of restoration. So there are folks that believe this is like the end times. Like a lot of people call Daniel the book of Revelation for the Old Testament. So some people assign an Antichrist kind of figure to the story. Some people assign Titus, who was the Roman emperor that destroyed Jerusalem again. They assign him to this kind of antagonist figure. There's a lot of different views on it. But again, I think for me anyway, and I would encourage you guys as listeners, don't get lost in the weeds on these dreams and visions. Just remember that ultimately the point of the dreams and visions is that this conqueror is coming on God's behalf, and this conqueror who is coming on God's behalf, this Son of Man, will enjoy victory and will be sovereign over all nations, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That's definitely Jesus. So we can look at these visions and we can be like, that monster is scary and that guy sounds bad. It's easy to get interested in that stuff. It's easy to be scared of that stuff. But I actually think the point of these visions is to not be scared of that stuff, to know that God has assigned a point and a time where he will have ultimate victory. And our hope is in that ultimate victory. We don't need to be afraid of all these scary sounding rulers, even though we may see them at some point, depending on your view. They are not more powerful than God is. And if there's any theme of Daniel, it is that God is more powerful than anyone who tries to come against him. He always is enjoying the victory, and that is why we serve him. So I think that probably puts a bow on it as a nice your part. Don't get nervous about all the weird stuff. Just enjoy the fact that we have hope in God, that we are serving the God of the universe that holds all things in his hand. And we don't need to be afraid because our hope and our trust is in him. So we'll be back again tomorrow. We'll probably be wrapping up Daniel tomorrow. So we'll see you then.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.